If someone had told me 5 years ago that the majority of people with massive audiences on this site who are billed as being intellectually inclined in one way or another, if you had told me that those types of people would be waiting with bated breath for something like VidCon so that they can do endless responses to it and just endless coverage of it and endless analysis of it, I would have laughed in your face if you had said that to me just 5 short years ago. Hell, even 3 years ago. And then we just seemingly took a nosedive in the last 2 years or so. You can apply it to a lot of other things. If someone had told me just a couple of years back that people would be waiting with bated breath to do endless analysis of the next thing that comes out of Lacey Green's mouth, I would have probably laughed in your face even more than with the VidCon example. And yet, here we are. And I'm not just talking massively popular channels with hundreds of thousands of audience. I'm talking about moderately popular channels. So anything that really gets 10,000 views per video or beyond will sooner or later fall victim to those pressures, to those trends. And it's fascinating to observe. I can't think of a single channel that does not at one point or another succumb to those lollipop topics. And it's not like it's impossible to get to the next level without pandering to individuals who are really passionate about those lollipop topics, because we've seen it happen before. We've seen it happen from 2000 on to, I'd say, 2006 on to 2012, 2013. It was fairly easy to do. And then some sort of a nosedive happened. And now political discourse is dominated by people who are far less passionate about politics per se, and far more passionate about things that sort of kind of squeeze in to politics, like politics adjacent stuff. It's not even culture wars in the way culture wars used to be waged. It's just this weird fusion of, yeah, people who want to clean up something as trivial as video games, and then people who want to keep video games unclean. And like that's where the battle lines have been drawn when it comes to stuff that really gets the eyeballs. Like that's where the battle lines are drawn in the mid-2000s, and I don't see it changing with the mid-2010s, and I don't see it changing in the late 2010s. In fact, if recent trends are any indication, it might just get worse. And I know that by complaining about it, I'm not going to change a damn thing. Nonetheless, I'm going to complain about it because it's somewhat therapeutic. I'm sick of always complaining about it in here only. I feel that at least one video about this will be justifiable. Will it not? I notice every now and then people who are like-minded tend to have the same grievance, and it's okay to complain about it, just don't make a habit out of it, because then you also are, well, by association, discussing the same topics. So, a second ago I said complaining about it will do nothing, but nonetheless I find myself drawn to ask the question, well, how can we make it change? How can we get people? It shouldn't seem like a difficult thing to do. People prefer to signal sophistication. People prefer to try to climb the epistemic dominance hierarchy. You can sort of tell that there's a lot of people who wake up every day and instead of just saying, how can I reduce the most suffering today, or how can I make the most truthful claims today? Instead, what they do is they ask themselves, maybe subconsciously, these are sort of gears working, but the subconscious gears working say, well, how can I be uniquely interesting on the internet today? You can really tell that those are the kinds of subconscious gears working. And insofar as that is an accurate assessment on my part, we're just blowing it. Because the stuff that gets discussed within the subculture kicks the shit out of the stuff that will be on your recommended feed. And that will keep appearing on your recommended feed no matter how many times you click it off. And I'm thinking about things like scope insensitivity, right? Just fascinating concept, well researched, well documented, decades worth of evidence for it, and yet, are you going to see a YouTube video that discusses it in depth and gets more than a couple of hundred views? Of course not. So what I'm going to do is read Mr. Yudkowsky's entry over on Less Wrong on scope insensitivity that dates back to 2007, because why the fuck not? Maybe I'm going to make a habit out of doing that, taking old Less Wrong articles and transferring them into video form. Because there's no better way to overcome bias than to read stuff from that site. Step number 1, spot the bias. Step number 2, analyze the bias to bits and pieces. Step number 3, ask yourself point blank, is the bias bad, and do I want to get rid of the bias? Step number 4, hopefully you've answered yes to number 3. Step number 4, find a workaround pertaining to the bias. And step number 5, implement that workaround. And implement it systematically. Not just when you feel like it, but non-stop. A lot of things are easier said than done, and I'm not saying absence of perfection means you should give it up, but strive for perfection. Strive to eliminate the bias. And one of the most prominent biases surface in what gets clicks. Of course, there's always the chance that people are just using YouTube as a way to unwind because they have their brains are drained due to scholastic commitments or career commitments. But I have occupational commitments myself, and still there's a balance act. I don't want to do theoretical physics when I unwind and get back home, but at the same time, I don't want to watch endless videos on fucking VidCon either. Why is it so hard to strike some sort of balance? You don't need to eat celery all the fucking time, but you don't need to eat Oreos all the fucking time either. Anyway, so on to the article I would like to read, because it loosely ties into this. It is on scope insensitivity, aka scope neglect, and it was written in 2007. So Yudkowsky writes, once upon a time, 3 groups of subjects were asked how much they would pay to save 2,000, 20,000, or 200,000 migrating birds from drowning in uncovered oil ponds. The groups respectively answered $80, $78, and $88. This is scope insensitivity or scope neglect. The number of birds saved, the scope of altruistic action, had little effect on willingness to pay. Similar experiments showed that Toronto residents would pay little more to clean up all polluted lakes in Ontario than polluted lakes in a particular region of Ontario. Or that residents of 4 western US states would pay only 27% more to protect all 57 wilderness areas in those states than to protect a single area. People visualize a single exhausted bird, its feathers soaked in black oil, unable to escape. This image, or prototype, calls forth some level of emotional arousal that is primarily responsible for willingness to pay, and the image is the same in all cases. As for scope, it gets tossed out the window. No human can visualize 2,000 birds at once, let alone 200,000 birds. The unusual finding is that exponential increases in scope create linear increases in willingness to pay. Perhaps corresponding to the linear time for our eyes to glaze over the zeros. This small amount of affect is added, not multiplied, with the prototype effect. The hypothesis is known as valuation by prototype. An alternative hypothesis is, quote, purchase of moral satisfaction, end quote. People spend enough money to create a warm glow in themselves, a sense of having done their duty. The level of spending needed to purchase a warm glow depends on personality and financial situation. But it certainly has nothing to do with number of birds. We are insensitive to scope even when human lives are at stake. Increasing the alleged risk of chlorinated drinking water from 0.004 to 2.43 annual deaths per 1,000, which is a factor of 600, increased willingness to pay from $3.78 to $15.23. Barron and Green found no effect from varying lives saved by a factor of 10. A paper entitled Insensitivity to the Value of Human Life, a study of psychophysical numbing, collected evidence that our perception of human deaths follows Weber's law, obeys a logarithmic scale where the, quote, just noticeable difference is a constant fraction of the whole. A proposed health program to save the lives of Rwandan refugees garnered far higher support when it promised to save 4,500 lives in a camp of 11,000 refugees rather than 4,500 lives in a camp of 250,000 refugees. A potential disease cure had to promise to save far more lives in order to be judged as worthy of funding. If the disease was originally stated to have killed 290,000 rather than 160,000 or 15,000 people per year. Moral of the story, if you want to be an effective altruist, you have to think it through with the part of your brain that processes those unexciting inky zeros on paper, not just the part that gets worked up about that poor, struggling, oil-soaked bird. Your video game wars, your culture wars, your notions that political perspectives in some way map on to lifestyles, that there is such a thing as a political identity, all of that is the oil-soaked bird. Give it up. If I see another tweet handle that says proud so-and-so, typically see it with proud patriot. Sometimes see it with proud conservative. Every now and then it is a proud liberal. Sometimes proud communist. The point is using politics as a self-esteem boost mechanism is disqualifying. You have already outed yourself as someone who's not playing by bird's eye view perspectives. Never glean anything in the way of a self-esteem boost from what you believe. That's never gone wrong in the past, right? What could possibly go wrong in the future? It is a problem. I like Chan culture, on my juvenile days especially, but you can see how it's a fucking problem. You can see how it's spreading like wildfire. And the more it spreads, the more people who aren't in it strictly for the lulz will actually take certain things from it that they're not meant to take from it. Like intermingling your self-esteem with your correctness / incorrectness, which you will always view as correctness. Memes have done a horrible thing with this as well. Because you can tell, people get all sorts of dopamine hits when a meme complements their either value system or political preferences by taking the piss out of the outgroup. All these things can be enjoyed if the observer knows not to get all kinds of warm glows from it. If someone's taking the piss, that's all they're fucking doing, is taking the piss. We seem to know that once upon a time. And it seems like we are forgetting it. And we need to cut it out.